There's been a trend in the last few years, I would say in probably the last 3 to 5 years, that for the first time in US history, we're seeing a decrease of entrepreneurs coming into the market. So there was always a growth in the small and medium business world. So even though small and medium businesses failed at an astronomical rate, there was always more people coming in to fill those holes. So we never saw a decrease in the number of small and medium businesses.
Welcome to the Unbridled Mindset. Finance Without the Fluff, the podcast that brings you practical, no-nonsense insights on managing the financials of your business. Every month, we'll be sitting down with experts and industry insiders to give you tips, strategies, and the latest financial market updates. If you're growing a startup, taking your small business to the next step, or managing a private equity firm, you know that the right financial decisions are critical. But sometimes companies think their financial position is stronger than it really is, or they're unsure if they're really getting the right guidance, and that's where we come in. On this podcast, we cut through the fluff and get straight to what works. Whether it's case studies or proven tactics for navigating tough decisions, you'll learn how an integrated financial approach can lead to better outcomes for your business. This is Finance Without the Fluff.
All right, welcome back to Unbridled Mindset, Finance Without the Fluff. I'm Dionisio Roman, your host for today's episode, and I'm joined by Kristy Crockett, the Managing Director of Accounting and Analytics at Unbridled Advisory. So today we're going to be diving into a topic that every business owner needs to understand, and that is the basics of accounting and bookkeeping. Kristy has extensive experience helping businesses of all sizes make sense of their financials and financial processes. And together, we're going to be talking through a discussion about the importance of accounting in your bookkeeping. So welcome, Kristy. If I may, I just want to open up with a simple question, and that is, what is the main difference between various types of accountants that we see and come across in our day-to-day as business owners?
Well, I think the biggest change, we're starting to see some diversification in the accounting world. We're starting to see accountants become more specialized. So we're starting to see accountants, originally when I first started in this industry 18 years ago, accountants were accountants. Everybody did the same thing. Everybody operated in the same space, and they didn't necessarily lean in towards or even focus in towards like a specialty. And I think we're starting to see some specializing within accountants. So we're starting to see what we call financial accountants and tax accountants. So they're both operating in a similar space, and sometimes they wear the same hats. Sometimes they have the same strategic approach or the same direction, but they often are not in the same person. So we're starting to see that diversification. I like to equate it towards, the difference between a brain surgeon and a heart surgeon. You wouldn't want a heart surgeon doing brain surgery or a brain surgeon doing heart surgery. You don't want a financial accountant doing your tax returns, and you don't want a tax accountant helping you manage your day-to-day financials. There's a different strategy. There's a different approach. There's a different mindset in it. And so financial accountants tend to be more strategic. They tend to be more in the day-to-day. They tend to be more in the strategy and how you're going to do things in a right now and here positioning, and then in a forecasting positioning. So they live in that, where tax accountants, I'm going to call them my plug-in players. And the plug-in players are not to be discounted. They are extremely good at what they do. They know where to put numbers and how to put numbers and how to take that data and plug it in a way that saves you tens of thousands of dollars. So you really need somebody to be in that strategic mindset in that operational side, but you also need those tax accountants that plug everything in the right holes and understand the tax laws, because tax laws change with the wind, with the seasons. It's a moving target. It's never the same. There's a reason I'm not a tax accountant.
In the White House, right?
Yeah. Take whatever political stance you want, whatever economic stance, whatever. I don't even know what some of the reasons are between and why they changed some of the tax laws, but tax laws are ever changing. So you need somebody, like, if you think about how much that changes, having somebody who focuses just in on that. There's even some that I encourage to find tax accountants that specialize in certain industries, right? Because in those industries, depends on what's changed for that industry. I love to use construction as an example. Within the last 5-10 years, construction reporting and how you report contracts in construction and revenue recognition in construction changed significantly. And you had to know what's going on. You had to know what the changes were. You had to be on top of it. Transportation, trucking companies changed about 6 years ago in what they could and could not recognize and how they recognize different things. So if you put a new engine in a truck, that now became a capitalized investment into that asset and not just an expense. You were no longer able to take that large expense within one calendar year. And so when we make these slight and subtle changes within industries, it impacts small and medium businesses on a huge scale. And it's hard because in the United States, 99% of businesses, registered entities, are small and medium businesses. So they drive our economy.
Yeah. So if we were to take a deeper dive into each of these uh, aspects of accounting, financial accounting and tax accounting, can we just start to define a little bit what the financial accounting piece is? And I think another word we've used for this is bookkeeping, right? Am I correct in that?
Yeah. So
Um,
you're going to see a financial accountant work more with bookkeepers, right? So the hard thing is small and medium businesses are kind of limited on cash flow, right? They don't. If money was if it was money was not an object. If we just had all the money in the world to buy and pay for anything that we want to buy and pay for, we could all have the moon. We'd all be able to hire a high level CFO and have the highest level of educated bookkeepers we possibly can. But we don't live in that space. We don't live in that world. We live in the small and medium business world, and in that world, we do what we can with what we have. And so a lot of people do their own bookkeeping. So you see a lot of entrepreneurs that they themselves or their wives or their husbands or their sister or their mother-in-law, somebody within their close circle is doing their bookkeeping. And the really cool thing about that person is that person's not an accountant. But there's an important piece where that financial accountant comes to the table and works with the bookkeepers. So I always tell people, yes, you have to have a bookkeeper. You have to have somebody that's going to make invoices and pay the bills. But bookkeeping is a little bit more complex than just balancing your checkbook. And I don't know we kind of live in a generation where people don't balance their checkbooks anymore. I don't even know that they look at their bank statements. They look at their bank balances on a day-to-day basis and they wing it, right?
yeah, yeah,
Some of the people who are more on top of it, they might have a
yeah.
budget.
It's like QuickBooks Online. They've modified their service to be so user friendly that anybody can be a bookkeeper, right? And so maybe that's the challenge that we face is that it is so easy,
It is.
or well, seemingly, right, with the tools, but in reality, that's not the case.
It's not. So that's what I find a lot is we need hobbyist bookkeepers. We need bookkeepers who say, you know what, we're a startup, we're a small business, cash flow's tight. Family members are cheap because they're often free, right? I know when my husband first started out 20 years ago, I did his bookkeeping for him. I still do his bookkeeping for him today. And I am the cheapest bookkeeper accountant that he's ever had because I don't charge him a penny, right? So that's the benefit. The only benefit for him is I come with a whole lot of college education and some certifications and all the good, there's perks, it's like having a doctor in the family. You get free diagnoses, and Thanksgiving holidays and Christmases look a little different because you don't have to worry about some, there's benefits to it, right? So he fully takes advantage of the benefits. But not everybody has an accountant that lives in the family who's at their fingertips to be able to give that guidance. But in my career, I've really noticed a huge difference between whether or not you have a bookkeeper and whether or not you have an accountant in your bookkeeping. And what I mean by that is you don't want to pay an accountant to come in and make an invoice for you. to send to your clients. You don't want to pay an accountant to come in and pay your bills, but you do want an accountant in your bookkeeping to monitor that day to day, to help you with that forecast, to help you with that strategy, to help you develop a budget, to manage cash flows. So you're not getting into a position where all of a sudden you're trying to figure out how to make payroll, because that's where a lot of small businesses live, and even medium businesses. I always say you can be a multi-million-dollar company. It's not going to solve all your problems. You're still going to stress on whether or not you can make payroll. That's a reality. Payroll is one of the largest expenses for most businesses, and you don't want to be worrying about that. You want to have a plan. Most businesses, most industries are impacted either on a seasonal basis or they're impacted by economics, whether it be on a global scale with natural disasters or at a political scale. The world and our industries are fluctuable. Like they're not stagnant. We don't live in a stagnant world. We live in a moving world. And sometimes that moving world is like the little engine that's trying to climb a hill. And sometimes it's a spitting bullet and it's a train that's flying by at rocket speeds. So you really have to be able to judge what's happening, what's fixing to happen, and how different pieces of the economy impact different industries. And most people don't understand what those things will do to their businesses. And so they're flying blind, and they get to a slow time and they don't understand why it slowed down. They don't understand why all of a sudden the phone stopped ringing or customers stopped buying and their revenue has taken a tank. They didn't see it coming. And the goal with a financial accountant and having an accountant in your bookkeeping is you now know what's coming. And you now understand, and you have a strategy and you have a plan for the future. And we're not being reactive, we're being proactive. Small and medium businesses fail astronomically. I think the statistics these days are well over 90% of small and medium businesses fail in the first 5 years. There's been a trend in the last few years, I would say in probably the last 3 to 5 years, that for the first time in US history, we're seeing a decrease of entrepreneurs coming into the market. So there was always a growth in the small and medium business world. So even though small and medium businesses failed at an astronomical rate, there was always more people coming in to fill those holes. So we never saw a decrease in the number of small and medium businesses. For the first time in history, the US has seen a 16% decrease in small and medium businesses in the US.
Yeah, I've never heard that put that way.
That is where, drive down small town, drive around any town. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if it's a small town. It doesn't matter if it's a big city. Go for a drive and tell me how many storefronts are empty. How many business offices no longer exist? Not because they went remote, but because they don't exist anymore. Our economy and our world is shifting. And more entrepreneurs are afraid to go in business for themselves because they've watched their parents, they've watched their grandparents, they've watched aunts, uncles, cousins. Somebody in their family has been an entrepreneur, and they watched the struggles. And ultimately, they watched the failures. And we've created a world where people say, why would you want to do that? But there's still, to me, the entrepreneur spirit still exists. There are people out there they still have this passion and this desire to create something from nothing and to own their own world. And I call it dreaming big.
Yeah.
And being able to look at it and say, I want to reach for the stars, and I want to dream about the moon, and I want to be able to get there. And a lot of them don't know how to get there. So they start these businesses. If they go and get a startup, right? So they may go work with like the SBA, or they may go work with some kind of, there's so many small business financial backings out there. They may develop a business plan and they have this wonderful idea and they're excited about it. They're passionate, get on board with an entrepreneur and you feel their desire, they feel their passion. And it's a fun world to live because you get to live on the edge and you get to dream big. You don't just clock in and clock out and just push paper for the day. You live in a world of excitement and excitement for the future and hope for the future, where that could go. So as we see entrepreneurs choosing not to go into business, I think that that's where we're starting to see accountants step out and say, whoa, let me help you. Let me join you. Let me be a part of that space. Let me be the accountant in your bookkeeping. Let me work with you. Your bookkeeper can still be cheap. They can still be free. In fact, they can still be a husband, a wife, a spouse, an aunt, uncle, cousin, grandma, whoever wants to dive in with you, who sees the potential of the dream that you have. But having an accountant in that space that understands what you can deduct, what is a business expense, how to strategically position yourself where you're able to take the most off the top. So that's where, my favorite is, there's a big deal going on about business owners versus paychecks, right? Versus going and getting a job for somebody else. If you get a job from somebody else, you pay taxes off the front, and then you pay your expenses, and then you have what's left. Businesses are different. Businesses can make the same amount of money, and they get to pay all these business expenses first. And it's very, very easy to create something and make that expense into a business expense. And then they pay taxes on what's left. So at the end of the day, they're paying significantly less tax because taxes last, not first.
Right. Yeah. It's a great opportunity. That's a good segue as well, because I think that most entrepreneurs are familiar with accountants from a tax perspective. And in all the research, they're converting to S corps for tax purposes, or they're being advised to do X, Y, and Z to save money on taxes. And that seems to be like the main conversation when chatting amongst entrepreneurs about accounting. And you've obviously just explained that there's a whole, another universe to the equation. But can you dive into how those two types of accounting kind of complement each other, how they go hand in hand, and why they're both equally important?
So the fun thing is I love when people tell me, well, I already have an accountant. Great. You talk to that accountant, once, maybe twice a year? Maybe that accountant tells you how much money,
Twice a year.
twice a year. So you get towards the end of the year, sometime between the Halloween and Christmas, you might meet with your accountant so that they can tell you how much money you need to spend so that you don't have to pay Uncle Sam, right? Except for you're trying to figure out how you're going to spend that much money because you ain't got it in the bank. That's the fun part, right? Like, now your tax accountant has looked at you and says, hey, congratulations, you need to spend 100K. And you're going, where the heck am I going to get 100K from? I've got a couple 100,000 in the bank. If I'm lucky, I might have a couple hundred, depending on where you are and how your cash flow management is. And so my favorite is tax accountants are really, really good at what they do, but they're not in it in the day-to-day with you. The best I've seen in the tax accounting world is they'll meet with their tax accountant quarterly. Most of the time it's semi-annual, but too often it's annual. And so now we're being reactive. Now we're reacting to what's already happened for the last 10 to 12 months. Now we're making a strategic decision in hindsight. Not a plan, not a future, not a dreaming mode. We're reacting to where we've been without a plan of where we're going. And that's a really, really bad way to live life. Most of us don't live life that way. I don't know why we run our businesses that way. It's absurd to me, but that's where businesses live, right? We live in this hindsight, and then we're reactive to what's coming instead of living in a world where we're planning for the future and we have an idea and we're dreaming about where we're headed, but we're doing it in a financial way too. We're doing it in a strategically financial way. So you need those tax accountants, but in my history in this industry, I have found a lot of accountants they don't like to share the sandbox. They don't like when other people touch their toys. They feel threatened. It's an industry that definitely is not as welcoming to new accountants as they come out. There's some businesses that will help you get your CPA license as soon as you graduate college, and they'll support you through it. There's a lot of states that require educational hours that you have to study underneath another CPA to even be able to get your CPA license. There's some places that are extremely resistant to that. And it's because there's a threat within the industry. But what I have found as more and more accountants understand the difference between a financial accountant and a tax accountants don't want to live in your day to day. They don't want to be in the weeds of your bookkeeping. They don't want to build cash flow models and forecasts. They don't want to think strategically on a regular basis of where you're going to go and how you're going to accomplish it. That's not their space. They want to manage your taxes. They want to make sure you pay Uncle Sam as little as possible. And they want to do it once or twice a year. They don't want to be there every day. They don't want their phone ringing all the time. They live in a different world. And I have found, I work with several tax accountants. And we complement each other very, very well. Because I do things that they don't want to do. And they do things that I don't want to do.
Beautiful.
I don't want to
Symbiotic
live.
relationship.
Yeah, we really complement each other. We feed off of each other. We support each other. I'm over here figuring out the strategy on how to do revenue recognition and high level contracts that bridge gaps on a year to year basis, and making sure that we're capturing that according to accounting standards, right? Because there's standards in accounting, right? We want to just think that bookkeeping is, I made an invoice, I got paid for the invoices, I paid bills. Well, that can get a little bit more complex. And that complexity goes beyond money in, money out. It's how we recognize that money and when we recognize that money, because we want to tie that revenue to those expenses. So if you're working in an industry where you get paid a lot of money, all of a sudden, let's say you signed a $250,000 contract in December, but you didn't actually start the work until January, February. You don't want to claim that income in the previous year. You want to tie it to the expenses, right? That's the cool thing about being an entrepreneur. You get to claim those expenses first. Well, you got to tie that revenue to it too. That's a huge piece that most people miss, is making sure that you're tying those expenses to the dollars that they go with. So you want to make sure that that money in connects to that money out. And when you're reporting it on taxes, you're bridging those gaps. You're making sure that if you're going to cross a calendar year, it's being done correctly. And a lot of tax accountants provide that advisory, but it's in high-level advisory. They don't leave their clients in a lurch. They're not going to leave them out there to dry. They're going to be there, but probably not at the level that most people are wanting.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Can we dive a little bit into some of the financial strategy that you talk about and some of these key decision-making things that you advise for your clients? Like what's an example of something that you provide advice for and that they can then carry out and have a successful outcome as a result? Just to make it a little bit more tangible for the listeners, so they fully understand what you mean when you talk about financial strategy.
So my favorite in small and medium businesses, they tend to live in the here and now. So they're worried about maybe sales within a month, maybe a gross revenue goal within a month, maybe a customer touch, maybe a retail goal. It just depends on the industry that they're in. And they don't necessarily plan for how that's going to impact their expenses. So I'm what they would consider like a project and cost accountant. My specialty lies in cost accounting. And a lot of people who think of cost accounting or costs think of cutting costs. Like that's what we've always heard of, is if somebody makes a budget, we live in this world where like, well, I'm going to put everything on a budget. Well, budget means you get less money, but I want you to do more with less money, right? That's the mindset of it. I take the mindset of what's the return on the investment. So if you're spending money, it doesn't matter if you're in a small business, a medium business, if you make a couple $100,000 a year or a couple $1 million a year, or you're making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. How is what you're spending driving your revenue? How is it driving your business forward? So you really have to take a different mindset. So when you're looking at a strategy and you're looking at a movement, if you're sitting in a business where you're just like, oh, well, I'm content with where I'm at. That's my favorite. A stagnant business is a dying business. That's the reality. If you're sitting in a business and you're a small business owner and you're content with the customers that you have and you're doing nothing to grow, you will become antiquated and you will be one of those percentages of small businesses that fail in the first 5 years. Even if you've been around 10, 15, 20 years, you will all of a sudden see that your businesses start to decline because you're doing nothing to move forward.
Why do you think that is? Is it just because of like clients inevitably churn, complacency? Like, what's the reason?
It's a combination of both. It's a combination of everything. So there's a complacency, and customers want to get on board with something that's moving. We don't live in a stagnant world. We live in a world that's moving, it's evolving, it's changing constantly. And we live in this world of high-level technology. 20 years ago, a global market was untouchable by small and medium businesses. They couldn't step on that market. They couldn't even step out into that world. Bakeries, my favorites are bakeries. Bakeries were stuck with whatever regional that they could touch within a certain radius of their store, right? Now we live in a world that bakeries are on a national scale. You can buy strawberries that are chocolate dipped from Valentine's Day from a store in New York City. You can get baked goods from your favorite bistro in Chicago. It doesn't matter where you live now and where you're marketing to, you're now marketing to a lot. And it's so much different than what it was before because now small and medium businesses can play with the big boys. But here's the difference. You want to play with the big boys, you better have a plan. You better have a strategy. You can't go into it being reactive. You have to go into it having a clear understanding and being proactive. So all of a sudden you get a bill because you dealt with somebody overseas and it's in euros. What are you going to do now? There's a conversion. There's a reporting of that. How do you convert that? How do you report that? How do I change this to my books? How do I recognize the revenue? There's so many questions that become at play that you don't think about it until you're in it. And now you don't have a plan. And so there has to be a direction. There has to be a movement. When you become complacent in business, you become stagnant. When you become stagnant, your customers will go find somebody else that's moving, that's innovating, that's shifting, that's creating something exciting. Because consumerism is evolving. It's an emotional decision. What people buy is an emotional decision. We buy things out of necessity, like food, but even the food that we buy, where we eat, the brands that we buy, is emotional. And businesses who lose touch with their customers will lose their customers. And so you have to have a strategy. You have to have a plan. You can't just go status quo. You go status quo and you're going to be in trouble. And just most companies, you could probably, if you go status quo, it's going to be within a couple of years. If you make it 5 to 10 years, I'll be surprised. You'll be one of the lucky ones that makes it that far. But you have to have a direction. If you're driving a car, you have a map, right? You know where you're headed. You know how to get there. You know what you're doing. You know how often you need to stop for gas. You've planned your potty breaks, especially if it's a long trip. Yeah, if you didn't plan your potty breaks, somebody's in the car is going to be upset. You know, there's got to be snacks. You gotta have snacks along the way. It's the same thing in business. You have to have a roadmap. You have to understand when you need to pause for a second so that you can refuel the tanks. You need to understand when to hit the gas pedal, when to slow down, and it's an ebb and a flow. And you have to go somewhere. You don't just jump in a car without some general direction. You can't just jump into business without some general direction. And it doesn't matter if that direction, where it goes, with where you're headed with your business, but if you don't have a plan with where your business is going, it will die. Because we don't live in a stagnant world, and we don't live in a world where we can depend on customers coming around the corner just because we are who we are.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I mean, when was the last time, I'm going to use Sears and Robust as my biggest example. Whoever dreamed? I remember at my grandparents' house having a Sears and Robust catalog, right? Whoever dreamed that Sears would be one of the companies that goes bankrupt? Whoever dreamed that they would find themselves in financial straits? What? Everybody loves us. Everybody comes to us. We're the number one retailer. We're iconic. People love us. They're never going to leave us. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Now look at where Sears is at now.
Yeah. Amazon takes over.
Toys R Us is another example. They never saw it coming because they were in the complacency. They were in the who can compete with us world. Their mindset was wrong. And if it can happen to Fortune 500 companies that own such a large portion of the market, and they've got so many consumers that are loyal to them, that loyalty is never guaranteed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like Walmart having to reimagine their online store and also figure out distribution to be able to compete on shipping costs with Amazon. That was a big undertaking. They came out successfully, I suppose, although I don't
Yeah.
know how many.
And what did we get out
Yeah.
of that? We got Walmart curbside pickup. We don't have to go walk around Walmart anymore. We got Walmart delivery. I live in a podunk, tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, and we have Walmart delivery too. And it is so cool because I no longer have to worry about when I can go to Walmart. I ain't got time for that. I've got a life. I've got everything else. We live in a world where convenience is key, right? And we live in a world where people will consume things that make their lives easier or create an emotional connectivity. They either need to make me feel good or it needs to make my life easier. So I want one of the two things. But I'm not okay living in a world that's just simplistic. I want something. Everything I do, everything I buy, I either want a high level of customer service. I go to the same restaurant because I like the food, but more importantly, I like the atmosphere. I like the servers. I like the owners. I like the atmosphere within the restaurant. If it was just about getting good food, I could do that at home.
Yeah,
So it's not
sure.
about that.
Right.
There's a convenience. There's an emotional desire in that. And so you have to create something that people want to be a part of and they want to be involved with. And it doesn't matter if you're in retail. It doesn't matter if you're in manufacturing. It doesn't matter if you're a service-based industry. You have to be a part of it. And you have to have a growth plan, a strategy, a direction, a dream of where you want to go from here. Because if you want to maintain where you are, you better be moving forward.
Right. Right. So I'm a small business and I listen to everything you're saying and I'm sold. I'm like, yes, I need this, of course, because I don't want to be stagnant. I need my financial support to make sure my buying decisions are correct and going to drive revenue, et cetera, et cetera. At what stage does it make sense for me to say to my uncle who's doing my QuickBooks Online, hey, I need to upgrade and I want to pull Kristy on board to help me? When in the life cycle of a small business would you say that that makes the most sense?
The moment the light bulb goes off and you realize that you're missing the boat. So if you're a new business and you're a startup and you realize you're missing the boat, you need to get on that boat, right? If you've been in business for a few years and you're like, oh my gosh, I think I'm missing things. That's the moment. It's the moment that you realize that there's so much more and you're not on that ship. And that ship has left the harbor without you. You need to get on the ship. There's not a revenue structure to it. There's not a size structure. There's not well, I've reached this level. Now I need higher level support. Now I need higher level direction. That's a really cool thing about what we do in this industry. We live in a world where you have this, when I first started out, it was called a consultant. Then I got to be an advisor. In the last 4 or 5 years, there's this really cool world that came out. It's called fractional. And so I was like, oh, I get a new title. I'll take it. I need a new title. I like new titles. And so, but there's a big difference. So we always have had this mindset of like consultants or advisors. And that mindset's always been at arm's length, right? They've always been a third party. They've always been outside. They've always been something that you bring in for a season, but they go away. Or we only get them and I only use them when I need them. It's kind of like an attorney because they charge by the hour when you call them, sometimes every 15-minute marks. Or, you could talk to them for 10 minutes, but you're still going to get billed an hour. We live in this world where accountants are now becoming available. So people like me have worked in these large corporations. We've worked in these large markets. We've done all these really cool things. We have a completely different mindset, right? So I figured out that I can marry analytics and financial strategies with accounting. And I could become a cost accountant, and I could become way more cost directive and way more strategic in revenue and in spending. But for the lack of better words, we're unicorns in the industry. This is something that's a new evolution within accounting. This is something that's just now becoming on the forefront of what accountants can and should be doing. And it's really being driven by that globalization. It's really being driven by that highly competitive market, because now you're not just competing with the bakery within town, you're competing against bakeries across the globe. You're competing against, any bakery that can be able to, that figures out the formula, right? That figures out the secret sauce. And so you really have to have that moment where you say, oh my gosh, I'm just making money. I'm just spending money and making money, and I have no idea where it's going, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And I feel like I'm missing a piece. I didn't know I was missing a piece. That's what I find in a lot of my clients that I work with and a lot of the people I talk to, is they have no idea what they don't know. But as soon as you figure out that you're missing a piece in your financial and accounting management of your business, it's time to fix it. And you don't have to break the bank to do it. I always tell people that's the cool thing about fractionals. We're not advisors. We're not cold consultants. If you're going to engage somebody like me to come in and be the accountant in your bookkeeping, we're going into a marriage. We're going to be here for a while. We're going to be a long-term relationship. We're committing to each other. We're going to dive deep. We're going to be at the beginning of it. We're going to be at the end of it, and we're going to be at the middle. This isn't something that you pick up and you put down. This is something that once you start this process and once you have that strategic accountant on board, you will wonder how you ran your business without them. And they will become a very, very important and integral part of what you do on a day-to-day basis. So we come in, and the cool thing is we grow with you, right? So let's say you're a startup. Let's say that you need a little bit of advice. You need a little bit of strategy, how we're going to enter the market. We're bringing in there in the market. I have X number of dollars that I can spend to start this business. Is it enough? Right? I need to write a business plan. I need to understand what my business plan is. My favorite is people. I was actually working, I'm going to give an example. I was working with a client. They had just bought their business like February, March. They called me in June in panic because they were like, oh my gosh, I can't make payroll. And I told them, I says, okay, well, why didn't you had this plan. You had this business plan. You went down and you got your small and medium business loan. You went into that realm and you had this budget, right? So where'd your budget go? Well, we underestimated what insurance was going to cost us. We underestimated. Well, we calculated payroll, but we didn't include FICA, and we didn't take into consideration that we were going to have to pay businesses because some states require these benefits and stuff. So all of these extra things we didn't take into account. And that's usually what I hear is we didn't think about these things. Well, I'm not surprised you didn't think about those things because you're an entrepreneur. You're really, really, really good at what you do and whatever services or whatever product you're selling, but you're not an accountant. You're not a financial expert, and you're going to miss things. And that's what you don't want to do. You don't want to miss. You don't want to drop little things. You don't want to be, FICA is 7.65%. And so when you think about that on top of making any kind of payrolls or salaries, that's a chunk of, that can be a big chunk of change. That can be something that overwhelms you, especially if you've built a financial model and you've built a pricing strategy. You had a small margin to begin with, so now you have no margin. Now you understand why your business is going broke and why you can't make payroll and why you're struggling to make rent and why there's a problem, because you started off on the wrong foot. But it's fixable. There's never a point in time that I look at people and say, this is not fixable. You're screwed. Sorry. move on. That's not how we roll. It's painful, but there's always an opportunity. Where there's a will, there's a way. And that's the point of having somebody who comes in who understands the strategic side of finance and accounting. Is we see things that you don't, because this is the world we live in. This is the specialty. This is where we've specialized ourselves into. We do it on a day-to-day basis. So it's easy for me to pick things up and to see things that you wouldn't. My favorite is I laugh. There's a joke within our company that I'm the queen of cleaning financials and cleaning books. I have yet to meet in 18 years. I wish that I could say that somebody handed me a set of books that were actually correct. 99.9% of the time, they are not. And I see financials in a complete disarray. Even as easy as QuickBooks Online tries to make it, anybody that's used QuickBooks Online also knows that you go in there and all of a sudden the suggested categorization of an expense is so off the wall and unrelated to what that expense actually is. You correct it and you add it in and where it's supposed to be. So even the greatest of technologies that brings AI in, that tries to help us, is still not a person.
Right, right. I'd love to keep, so if we keep on that track, so as a small business who's just starting out, we loop you in to get involved. You're helping us figure out where the gaps are, the things that we don't know, and setting up the financial system so that we could begin tracking them into the future. Um, Curious to like dive into that a little bit further, and then also as we grow into the more medium sized, what how does the role between financial accountant and entrepreneur shift as we kind of grow? Like what are the levers of support that you guys provide with growth?
So my favorite, I love working with startups because then we can get off on the right foot, right? I don't have to clean financial statements. I don't have to go in and fix what's broken. I can come in and we can start off on the right foot. We can do things the right way from the very, very beginning. And people kind of freak out. They're like, oh my gosh, how much time is that going to take? What's that going to look like? It varies from person to person. But, we've got one that I jumped in. I helped him. His books are clean. They're ready to go. We manage them on a month-to-month basis. He has probably 4 or 5 transactions a month right now because he's still in that startup phase, right? He hasn't launched his business. He hasn't what we call go live, right? There's a moment that you go live with your business. And now we're moving, right? Now we're in the game. It's time to go. We've opened the doors. Let's launch. That's always my funnest place because we get everything in line. And when you're ready to go live, we work with you. We grow with you. And so as your demands and your things that you need go and move, we move with you. So it's not I was usually, sometimes I work with people 2 to 5 hours a month, depending on what they need. Sometimes I work with clients who are in the big middle of a huge corporate change, maybe an acquisition, maybe they're buying another business, right? Because baby boomers are retiring. There's a huge opportunity in the market right now for mergers and acquisitions because there's a level of people who have done a lot of blood, sweat, and tears already, and they want to retire and their kids don't want anything to do with it, right? So
Yeah.
there's a pivotal shift that's coming within the business world. And so there's different stages in that. And so what we do is we move with you. So it may be 2 to 5 hours a month. It may be 30. I may spend 30 hours a month with you. I may be 60 hours a month with you. I may spend 10 to 20 hours a week. It depends on what is going on. But the reality is when you're doing and you're moving in those spaces, your revenue is also moving with you. So you're not trying to figure out how to pay for that strategic help with a small budget. If you're in a small budget, you're going to pay for that strategic help in a small space. But the goal, I don't know a business owner that wants to just come in and make very little. I've never met an entrepreneur that says, I don't want to make much money. In fact, I don't want to make any money at all. I'm cool with where I'm at. I'm cool with just being broke. I'm happy if my bills are paid on a month to month, but I really don't need anything more. I don't want to buy a new car or have, I'm good driving my old clunker that I'm worried it's going to break down tomorrow. I've never met that entrepreneur. You find me that entrepreneur and I'd love to meet him, but I've never met that entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are dreamers. They've got a plan. They want to do something. They just don't always know how to execute it. So we execute it together. The more you need, the more we give. And so that's the cool thing about hiring somebody like me who works in that fractional space. We bring that high level corporate financial and accounting world to you because these Fortune 500 companies are not operating with just a tax accountant. They're operating with a financial accountant. They have an entire tax team, but they have an entire team that's just strategic. Cost accounting is probably not something that you see a lot in small and medium businesses. But you start looking into Fortune 500 companies and you have an entire department dedicated to cost accounting. And there's a reason for it. It's because you really got to control the cost to be competitive, to be profitable. There's controls that you need to have in place. You need to have a plan and you need to have a way to watch that and monitor it. And the really, really cool thing is all this can be done in simple systems like QuickBooks Online if you know how to use it. But if you don't know how to use it and you're just doing bookkeeping, because QuickBooks Online is friendly and it's easy and anybody can do it, you probably don't know what you're missing and you don't know the potential of what's in front of you because you don't know how to utilize the tools that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. Super, super insightful. And I'll just, I don't have any, so I'm just going to kind of wrap up. I don't have any more questions for you. We kind of worked through this whole thing.
Did I answer all of the questions? Sometimes
You
I
answered
forget what the
every
question is.
single one of them.
I get on a soapbox and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what the question was. And then I forget, I'm like, yeah, this is.
No, so thorough. So we talked about the difference between financial accountants and tax accountants. We talked about how their expertise complement each other and how both are equally as important in serving an entrepreneur's needs. We talked about the importance of investing in a financial accountant for the longevity and growth of your business, especially from a cost perspective, driving revenue. And then we also dove into how, or I guess when, is an important time for someone to invest in a financial accountant to come alongside them. And yeah, this was super, super informative. I think it's going to tremendously benefit the listeners. So, Kristy, any closing thoughts as we kind of wrap this episode up?
I think my number one thought and takeaway when it comes to bookkeeping, accounting, and the direction that small and medium businesses go is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to reach out to somebody, to reach out to me. Call me. I'll take a look at everything. I'll tell you where I see the pain points. Utilize resources that are out there because there's no sense in failing when you can be growing. So like that's my number one passion probably. People always ask me like, why did you want to be an accountant? Why did you want to do this? I'm the weirdo. My first degree is in science. I have a degree in animal science. I have a pre-vet degree. And here I am. But I also have a degree in accounting. And it became a huge passion of mine. I got tired of seeing small businesses fail. I got tired of seeing the pain point and the cash flow points and the struggles that small businesses face because the resources aren't there. Because they don't know where to go. They don't know where to look. They don't even know that there's an opportunity. They don't know that financial accountants exist. And so many people look at their tax accountant and say, help me do this, help me do that. Can you advise me on this? And that's not their strong suit. It's not what they do best. It's not their specialty. And so I think more and more, if we can get more accountants to understand that there's a strategic side to this, and that small and medium businesses are screaming from the mountaintops for help. The storefronts are where we see it. If we can start getting into that point where small businesses understand that there's a whole different world There's a whole different game in their business, and there's a whole opportunity that is being left untapped. We will change the face of entrepreneurs. We will change the face of small businesses. And we will stop seeing empty storefronts in our towns and in our cities. And we will start to see a growth in our entire country because entrepreneurs will be supported instead of just throwing all the time and the energy and the money at the big boys. We need to start spending the time and the money and the energy with the little guys because the little guys are the future.
Yeah. Love that, Kristy. Getting me hyped sitting here at
I
my
know.
desk.
Denisio's like, let's go. Where do we start?
Like, yeah, like talking about wrestling earlier, Friday Night Lights, and now accounting for,
I
it's
told
just
you,
all
don't get
so
me on my soapbox.
riveting.
I'm very passionate about, finance. Everybody's like, I don't usually get it. Like, who gets excited about accounting? Nobody gets excited about accounting. I get excited. Like, I've had people talk to me. They're like, I've never been this exciting about looking at financial statements, but I want to look at my financial statements with you. I want you to tell me what you see because what I see is different than what you see. And
Yeah.
it's a different mindset. And people have to, entrepreneurs get excited about their business. They get excited about whatever they're selling, whatever they're marketing, whatever services they're providing. They're extremely passionate about it, but they're not passionate about their financials. I've never seen anybody talk to a tax accountant that come out of talking to a tax accountant saying, that was the most exciting conversation I've ever had. Right?
Yeah.
You
Never.
tell me the last time you talked to your tax accountant. Did you get excited when you left that conversation? Probably
The
not.
only thing I got excited about is that I'm not projected to owe. So that left me leaving the call at least smiling.
Right? Well, that's the smile of relief because if you would have been told the opposite, that you're going to have to pay Uncle Sam some money, you probably would have been like, how? With what?
Right.
My bank account says I can't, right?
All right.
So it's different. So people after, like I said, people like me are unicorns. You won't always find people like me in the finance and accounting world. But I promise you, I will make you be excited about managing your finances. You will be excited about where your company is going to go and grow. You'll be excited about what the possibilities and the opportunities are. And you won't ever look at finance and accounting in the way of, I got to pay bills again this month, or freaking out because you've got to make payroll. It's flipping the script and changing the mindset of how you look and approach finances and how you manage those finances. Instead of being reactive, you're being proactive in it. And when your money has a plan, it's a good thing. Because when money doesn't have a plan, it'll plan it for you. And it's usually not in the best directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much, Kristy. To our listeners, you can connect with Kristy and potentially work with Kristy and her team by logging in or just searching unbridledadvisory.com and learning about all the different things that they do, the rest of their team members. And feel free to follow them on LinkedIn as well. Thanks again, Kristy. This was a great combo. I'm sure the listeners agree. And we'll see you next time on Unbridled Mindset.
Thank you.
If you're ready to take your financial strategy to the next level and stay ahead in today's competitive market, subscribe to Unbridled Mindset and join us for straightforward, actionable insights each month. This is finance without the fluff.